Our teaching text for today is found in Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. She went up to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her." You can be seated.
Well, good morning. It's good to be with you guys. My name is David Black. I'm the campus pastor here at Grace, and I just want to say welcome to you. Happy New Year. Hopefully that is starting off okay. I don't know about you. I got sick for Christmas a little bit. I think that's everybody right around this time of year. Something we say here often, and we mean it, is that we live to make Jesus make sense. And so if you're just coming back to church, maybe it's a New Year thing for you and it's a resolution. Maybe somebody invited you. Maybe you're a guest with us. Maybe this is your home church. But what we do every Sunday to kind of help make Jesus make sense is we open up this. Some people call this a Bible. We'll often call it God's heart because that's what it is. It's not a textbook. It's his heart. And see what his heart has to say about our heart. And so we get to do that today at this part in our gathering. Some other ways that Jesus makes sense, not just through his word, but is often through his people. And so real quick before we jump into the series, I just want to point out an opportunity that some of our young adults had yesterday. If you're a young adult, something we believe passionately about is that we think God has called us to stand at the difficult intersections of life with young adults. And so whether you're 20 or 28, there's probably something you're walking through. And so some of our young adults yesterday got to start the year off by doing like a day retreat, spent some time hiking outdoors, ended up in a cabin, had a guy come down from one of our family of churches and kind of share with them and kind of start the year off right. And so I just want to, if you don't know Brad, Dees Creek Brad, could you just throw up your hand or stand? It's kind of the same. Brad's right there. Brad, thanks for being with us and wrangling some young adults. If you have a young adult in your life and you wonder what is going on, Brad will explain all that to you if you want to talk to him. If you have a teenager and want to know how you can get them to think that you're cool, Brad will also figure that one out for you in the lobby afterwards. So just find him and pin him down. If you are a guest or even if you're just kicking off the year, I'm excited. You picked a good day to be here. We're starting a new series. The series is simply entitled All the Things. Have you heard about this? Have you heard about all the things, right? If you've not heard that phrase before, or if that's a young person's phrase to you, I actually brought along a definition for you. This is off Urban Dictionary, which you have to be very careful when you start looking around on Urban Dictionary, okay? I know that. But this one's pretty safe. All the things can be defined as this. All the things used to express overeager or widespread non-specific desire or action to do or have many, if not all, of a certain thing or action. That's not very helpful, is it? But you get the idea, right? It's like, oh, it's all the stuff. And one of the reasons we're starting off here in the New Year is because I think we all recognize that in our culture and society, the New Year is a time when we look back at the past year and we might need to make some changes for the new year. Call them goals, call them resolutions, call them what you want. But we could easily begin to add things to our lives that we think we're missing in the last year. So for example, maybe some of you have already made goals for this year. Like I got to add some things that I'm aiming at into my life. Maybe some habits. Maybe there's a couple practices that you want to pick up. Maybe it's just one. You're like, I got one this year. For some of us, it's not that. It might just be plans. So maybe you're starting to already look at your calendar and fill in the big things. Like, oh, okay, spring break. Where are we going? What are we doing? are we doing, right? When is that? We got summer, all right? We got the thing in the fall. We put all those in first and fill up your calendar with plans. For others of us, it's maybe places that we want to go, right? And maybe it's Paris, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just, I got to get out of Georgia. Or for some of us, we're beach people and we're like, I have to see the ocean this year to make it through this year, right? Maybe that's how you're thinking about that. And maybe it's not places or plans or goals. Maybe for you, it's actually just an item or something in your life where like, this is the year that I buy that thing. Or this is the year that I actually get a budget. Or this is the year when I begin to add a few things. Like every year I'm just expanding a collection, or maybe like our knives are dull, and this is the year we're actually getting kitchen knives, because when is it ever a good year to do that, right? So like maybe that's what you're adding in. And while I think some of those things are very helpful and practical, you should plan your calendar. You may have a goal, and that's good. There are probably a few places that you need to visit this year. I think what can happen for us, especially as Americans, is that we can begin to add many things into our life, and it can actually cause somewhat of a problem unexpectedly. We actually get into the year and we start to feel like, oh, man, this isn't working. Because here's what's entirely possible, right? It's entirely possible that we could be friends with everybody and yet not connect with anybody this year. That's a possibility. It's a possibility that our calendar this year might be full of very important, good things to do, and yet our hearts and souls be empty. It's entirely possible that our homes could be added to a collection of maybe apps or actual physical items that are made to help make our life easier, and yet, for some reason, life gets more complicated. You experienced that before? It's not a new problem. It's an age-old problem, and it's one that the Bible specifically addresses, and we heard addressed in this famous, if you grew up in church, story from Luke. In fact, in Luke chapter 10, we see this kind of tug of war between a lot and one thing. In fact, Jesus says to Martha, 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 you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Man, I don't know about you, but it is entirely possible to be so focused on the many that we miss the one. That's kind of what our series is about. I am so thankful that this story is here. Do you know why? Well, one, if you grew up in church, it's perfect for kids' church because it's just a perfect little story, and there's two people in it with Jesus at the center, and it's really easy to tell. It's kind of short. But I'll tell you what, I don't know how many times I've actually heard this as an adult, because I think it's a story that we tell the kids, but man, it's one we need as adults. Do you know why I also love this story? I love this story because it shows me that this whole thing of many and one, that tug of war that we feel, it's not just a modern American problem. I think it's a people problem because it's been around forever. The scripture that we read is at least 1,000 years old. 2,000. So you're like, man, this is the year I solved that. I think it's something that doesn't always ever go away. It's there. It's a tension, right? Do you know why I love this story? Man, this is so good. I love this story because Jesus is in the flesh in her house, and she's still got this problem. Do you ever feel like, oh man, if Jesus was just here, I wouldn't have to deal with like being distracted by all this stuff? You ever feel like, man, if God lived with me physically, if I could just see him and talk with him, if he could ride in my car to work, I'd be a better driver. You ever feel like if he was just here all the time and I could actually physically see him? Jesus is literally in possibly the same room, because sometimes the kitchen and the living room were the same back then. He's in the room, and she's struggling with this. And I'm like, oh man, that's so helpful for me. Because I'm like, man, it shows me that God himself could be present in the flesh, and I would still have to wrestle with my own flesh, right? And it's a great story. I think it's important that we understand what's happening here. I think the reason God puts it there, and I think really what the danger is if we don't understand that, and kind of why we're talking through the series is this. I think that if I don't get this in my own life, because man, this is me. I struggle with this. If I don't get this in my own life, what happens is it's not that I don't know what's important or what the one thing that's important is. I think what happens is the one important thing just begins to feel like one more thing. Like, oh yeah. I think the danger for those of us in this room who might follow Jesus, and I realize you don't have to follow Jesus to come here. But if you're someone who is following Jesus, I think the danger is not that we forget that Jesus is the one thing that we need, but the danger is that we're just like, oh yeah, and I should also do that one other thing, which is probably the Jesus thing, right? So we're going to take a look at this, just the introduction today. And we're going to talk through what I call the myth of the many. But before we do that, I just want to show what the myth of the many is not and what the story is not teaching, okay? So here's a sermon on what this is not, okay? Here, real quick, a side sermon. This story is not teaching organized people bad, carefree people good, okay? So if that's the argument in your marriage, I'm not going to pick a side on that one today. And the Bible doesn't say, hey, that OCD person in your life is not the devil. Sorry, right? This is also not saying, hey, people who have a lot of goals, bad. People who are kind of go with the flow, grab the Bible, sit with Jesus, get an Afghan cup of tea and some highlighters. That's what it means to follow Jesus. That's not what we're saying, okay? Also not saying that. He's also not saying, well, there's task people, and then there's people. There's things-driven people, and there's people, which psychologists will tell you that's a pretty decent division. And task people bad, good people good. That's not how that works, okay? Now, the issue isn't that Martha is a type A. The issue isn't that Martha has many goals. In fact, she's doing something she's supposed to be doing. It's her house. It literally tells us it was Martha's house. So she's acting like she owns the place, which she does. She feels responsible for that. It's not saying responsibility bad, none of that. It's actually this. Just like, hey, however you're wired, whatever you're doing, make sure that you're not so distracted by your day or the details or whatever it is you're doing that you actually miss Jesus. Don't buy into the myth that simply doing many things somehow equals doing the right necessary thing. Cool? I think there's a couple things we can learn from this. The first thing that I wrote down, when it comes to the myth of the many, what happens in our life is that it makes God smaller, kind of shrinks him. Like if I'm distracted by stuff, if I got a lot going on, whatever level of that is for you, because for some of us, 10 things, that's a lot of things. For others of us, our capacity, just the way we're wired, 2 things, that's a lot of stuff. So whichever way it goes, whenever I get into that mentality, I think God begins to get a little bit smaller. Well, look at what this verse says here. Notice Martha's busy. She's running around. She goes up to Jesus and says, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. So at some point in time, Mary was helping Martha, and then she kind of wanders over and sits down with Jesus, and Martha's left alone. And she goes, and she's like, man, it feels like Jesus is this big right now in my life because all these other things are happening. So she goes over and says, hey, how about Jesus, instead of just sitting there, why don't you tell Martha or Mary to come help me? Now, I don't know about you, but I think she probably rehearsed this a couple times in her head. Right? I kind of think this was already happening inside her head. The Son of God, the creator of the universe, the person who spoke the world into existence, is in her home. And she's like, hey, can you tell her to help me? Right? She's missing how big Jesus is. She's made him kind of just turned into like a, would you do this for me? Can you do the thing? Can you get the other people to do the thing? It's a little bit like this if you've driven an older vehicle. I think they're on newer vehicles. I don't know how it works with cameras anymore. But all growing up, I used to sit in the passenger seat in the front, and I would look out the window, and it would always have that warning that says, objects in the mirror are what? Closer than they appear. Meaning like, hey, if you're going to judge the distance off this mirror, danger, the way that this mirror presents reality is distorted. Right? It's distorted. It's actually a lot closer than you think. And so if you begin to interact with the reality around you as you're driving based off of this reference point, you're going to actually probably collide with other things. It's going to make what's around you look different. The danger of a distracted life is that God gets distorted. We begin to view him differently. And if we begin to interact with God and how his affection for me, or maybe his attention for me, based off of how involved he is in all the things that I'm involved in, we're going to end up with a distorted view of the God of the universe. That's what happens. Now, the Son of God is in her house, and she feels alone. She feels alone. God, where are you? Mary's not with me. Or do you not, what'd she say? Do you not care? Don't you care, God? You ever pray like that? God, don't you care? I got a lot going on. These kids are driving me insane. Don't you care? God, don't you care that I got a lot of pressure? I got details. I got a contract I got to close. I got a house that needs to be cleaned. I've got a calendar that needs to be done. I've got a lawn that's just growing. It looks like the jungle. God, don't you care? And now there's one more thing. You ever pray, God, I need you to tell that person to get it together. Some of you, you're here with other people, hoping that somehow God might tell them that this morning, right? Your prayer on the way in this morning, God, I need you to tell this person that 2025 is going to be different, okay? Like we start praying that way. The irony is this. The irony is that she is freaking out trying to feed lunch to Jesus, and just a few chapters earlier, this is the guy who took 5 loaves and 2 fish and fed 20,000 people, right? She's like, I got to get this guy lunch. I'm like, I'm pretty sure he can handle that lunch, right? I think he's got that. But she's so focused on what she has in front of her that she misses who God is. In fact, I wrote this down. Her life with the Lord became about her own doing rather than what he is doing. I wonder if that happens to you. Are you basing your relationship with the Lord this morning off of what you're doing instead of what actually he has done in your life? Right? I know I get this way because I begin to pray differently, right? I start praying to God that way. In the Psalms, a guy who wrote a song about God put it this way, and man, this psalm is so convicting. I think it says the same thing as our passage today. It says this, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is vain that you rise up early. Then why the heck are we doing it? And go to bed late. Watching Netflix all night. No, eating the bread of anxious toil. For he gives to his beloved sleep. How awesome is it that we have a God who says, one of the ways that I love you is I let you sleep at night. One of the ways that you love me is you rest knowing that I'm holding the world together and you are not. Martha has a list, and that list is actually limiting her. Somewhere, it's very easy, right? Somewhere along the line, the barometer for faithfulness became busyness. That's so easy for happen to you and me. Writing in his book, Crazy Busy, Kevin DeYoung says this. He says, when we are crazy busy, we put our souls at risk. And I think that's it. It's not just that she's running around and going, oh, God, don't you care? There's something happening with her view of who God is. And because God's not on her page, she now views him as distant when he's literally right there. Literally right there. I wrote down this question. I think it's helpful for us. Do I believe I can do more on my feet than at his feet? Like, do I believe that what I'm doing for him matters more than actually taking some time and spending it with him. Right? Because outwardly, it's possible to be very, very productive in life. And yet, I found this to be true for me. It might be true for you. That although outwardly I might be being productive, there's a way to be outwardly productive that's inwardly destructive. And that's what she's doing. I wrote this down. Not only does the myth of many make God smaller, but the myth of many makes stuff larger. It makes those things so much bigger. Notice, God speaks to her as not from a high horse. He looks at her and goes, I know exactly what's going on inside of you. She goes, get her to help me. And he goes, here's how I want to help you. He says this, but the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. But one thing is necessary. You're anxious and troubled. The word anxious there in the Greek literally means take a piece of paper or a tissue and tear it into little tiny pieces. He's like, inwardly, you're being like torn to shreds, pulled in different directions by these other things. Things in your life have gotten so large that they're consuming your thoughts and your minds. It's interesting to me how much God, when he came to earth, talks about anxiety. Jesus would say this in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. He would say, therefore, do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. He's like, hey, why are you concerned about being worried? Now, worrying, the Bible will not say that anxiety alone is a sin. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. If you struggle with anxiety is a natural physical and mental response to danger. The difficulty is when things in life get so large that your body's going danger, danger, danger all the time, right? And eventually, it's just your body goes, we're done. We're done. So Jesus is going, don't run around and live your life as if everything is in danger all the time. In fact, Philippians chapter 4 puts it this way. It says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, that's prayer and requests, with thanksgiving, that's gratitude, which mental health people will tell you is also important, right? Let your requests be made known to God. In other words, he's like, hey, bring it to me. I think it's not just that I'm anxious that's the issue. It's that I try to just manage it myself. In fact, people will tell us that multitasking is not a thing. Okay, ladies, I'm sorry. I know you know that men can't multitask, but apparently no one can either. Okay? In fact, when we multitask, here's the issues. Oftentimes we reduce the quality of work. We have reduced efficiency. We've increased our stress, and we have impaired cognitive functioning. So if you're like in your 40s with little kids and jobs and responsibilities, and you're going, I feel like, what's wrong with me? Hey, it's just multitasking, right? And apparently that's it. Writing about this, Brown Health, the University of Brown puts it this way, multitasking and how it affects your brain health. Multitasking temporarily increases stress levels, which raises blood pressure and heart rate. Multitasking is also associated with symptoms of depression and anxiety. These effects can be temporary, but chronically increased blood pressure and stress can have permanent effects on the brain by increasing risk for cerebrovascular disease and cognitive impairment. That sounds real bad, right? Now, is that coming from the fact that we're anxious? Maybe. But I think it also is coming from the fact that we are anxious and we're trying to handle it ourselves. We're trying to multitask, and she literally is spinning plates in the kitchen. And Jesus looks at her and goes, Martha, Martha. In other words, her brain resembles this garage right here. See, sometimes the problem in my life is not more. It's less that I need. Or the problem is more, and what I need is not more but less. And so maybe the solution coming into 2025 is not, hey, I'm going to add things into my calendar. Maybe it's the opposite. But notice, Jesus is talking to her compassionately. The phrase Martha, Martha, when you said someone's name twice, it would be a intimate phrase. This isn't like your full name when you're in trouble as a kid, right? My middle name's Charles. David Charles Black, get in here. Things are not good, right? Jesus is not going, hey, Martha, Martha, get in here. He's trying to reach her. He's saying there's actually no room in your voice or in your head for my voice. Have you thought about that? Martha's got room for Jesus in her home, but not in her head or her heart. And so he's going, Martha, Martha, hey, you're anxious and you're worried about many things. In other words, maybe you shouldn't be so concerned for doing for me, and maybe be concerned about coming to me so that I might give you something from me. Martha, Martha, come to me. He's trying to reach her. Spurgeon was a pastor and a preacher, perhaps one of the most famous preachers of a generation. He also dealt with crippling depression and anxiety for his entire ministry. So if you ever want to know, man, how do I follow Jesus faithfully with depression and anxiety? Spurgeon is a tremendous, tremendous resource because he doesn't pull punches. And this isn't a guy who doesn't know Jesus. He puts it this way. He says, the ultimate aim is not to escape anxiety, but to allow it to usher us into the healing presence of Jesus Christ. It's like, Martha, you're anxious. You're troubled by many things. It's gotten too large. And he doesn't say, get it together, Martha. Get in here. Clean yourself up and come in to sit with me. He's saying, come to me. Bring it to me. I've got a solution for that. You see, I think sometimes we think that the best way to combat anxiety, or even our view of God, is just to say no to sin and no to my worry. Which, by the way, I think you should say no to sin and no to your worry. But I think sometimes the most healthy way to say no to sin and no to worry is just to simply say yes to Jesus. What if in 2025 you don't need to say no to worry and to sin as much as you need to say yes to Jesus this year? I mean, he pretty much says that, right? Because the myth of the many makes God smaller. It makes stuff bigger, and it makes me miss what matters. She's missing what matters. I think that's the largest danger. That's why we're talking about all the things that we might miss in 2025. What matters? Jesus says it. Don't miss, this is God in the flesh, come down to earth, saying something to you and me. Look at what he says. He says, you're troubled about many things, but the God of the universe says one thing is necessary. God, how much is on the list of what have I got to do? One thing. God, is it church? Is it service? Is it like raising kids? Is it like what is it? And God goes, one thing's necessary. One thing is needed. That's what he says in another version. It's one thing. Okay, God of the universe, what's the one thing? He's like, it's me. It's me. Someone has said that children spell love T-I-M-E. If you want to love your children, spend time with them. Seems like God's kind of similar. Jesus is going, you want to talk about love? Come spend time with me. The phrase, to sit at your feet. Notice that's kind of how Mary's described, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. That phrase, to sit at someone's feet, is shorthand. It's an idiom. It's a cultural phrase back then. It would have referred to somebody who is a disciple of a rabbi. By the way, traditionally, women were not allowed to sit at the feet of rabbis. Jesus' ministry is different. How awesome is that? That God's like, ladies, you are disciples of me. You can follow me. So he's got Mary in a posture of discipleship, sitting at his feet, listening. And Jesus is like, this is what I'm talking about. You want to know what it's like to have a relationship with the God of the universe? It's not running around doing a lot of activity. It's sitting here. Listen, service is good. Being responsible, also a good thing. And we're not talking about saying no to bad things. Oftentimes it's the good things that we have to say no to that are hardest. It's good. And yet Jesus seems to say that no amount of spiritual activity can replace intimacy with him. Now, if you don't know if you take vitamins, I probably should, or supplements, but typically supplements have a warning on them too. Supplements are not a substitute for a healthy diet. Some of you are like, thank you. I needed that. Because when you first find out about vitamins and supplements, you're like, do I have to eat other food? Can't I just eat them? And doctors are like, no. You can't just eat vitamins. In fact, you can get too many vitamins and that goes bad as well. So you need the right amount of vitamins. But you also need to eat healthy. And so it's easy for us to just take vitamins and then go, I'm going to eat pizza and whatever I want, and it's good because I got the vitamins. And they're like, hey, this is not enough. One vitamin C is not going to help you with 10 pizzas throughout the week, okay? It's not how that works. It doesn't cancel it out magically. You need to actually eat well. Jesus is looking at you and me and going, church attendance on Sunday morning, one church attendance doesn't cancel out whatever else you got going on. It's not about attendance. One service project isn't enough. It's not going to make up for it if you miss me. It's not just showing up. It's not just serving. It's not just doing stuff for Jesus. Some of us, we were raised in churches or homes where that's what we were taught. That's how we got close to God. The more busy you are, the closer you are to God. And for some of us, we saw people who were really busy, and suddenly their life crashes, and we go, I don't understand. They were doing everything for God. How could someone who's doing everything for God have a deficiency in their life like that? And the truth is they're spiritually malnourished because they were never close to him. I'm not making this up. Jesus says it. He says in chapter 7, he says, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, cast out demons in your name, and do mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Man, that's a scary verse for a pastor, to be honest with you. Because here's what happens if you're a follower of Jesus, you have a gift. And by the way, the gifting works. Some of you are very gifted at generosity. That gifting works. Some of you are gifted teachers. When you get up, you teach people learn. That's gifting. Some of you are gifted helpers. When you go to someone, they feel loved and cared, and it helps them, and they are benefited, and that gift works. And it works because it's a gift. That's what it is. But that gift is not knowing the Lord. It's not fruit. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And that comes from knowing him. So it's possible to be very gifted and yet still not know him. Jesus talks to a church in the book of Revelation. And he's like, man, you've done so much over the years. You got great Bible teaching. You've got great services. You've got great homeless ministries. But one thing you lack, you have left your first love. Some versions put it that way. You've lost the love that you had at first. In other words, you've forgotten to love me. Jesus goes, Martha, one thing's necessary. It's me. Do not allow the many to cause you to miss me. Here's what Mary knows, and here's what I think she wants us to know. And quite honestly, this is just kind of the point that's going to carry us through the next few weeks. It's this, that when it comes to Jesus, he isn't meant to live at the top of a list, but at the center of your life. So we're not just saying, hey, put God first. That's not what we're saying. We're not just going, make sure that in the list of all the places you go, Jesus is number one. Make sure in all the lists that you want to buy and things you want to have, Jesus is it. We're just simply going, is Jesus the center of your life? That's what Mary's done. Literally, she has oriented the furniture in the room, which would have been the floor. That was their furniture. Some blankets and pillows. She's oriented the furniture in the room around Jesus. And that's the way it is to be, not just in a home, but in our heart and in our life. Any person who's ever gone far and done great things for Jesus, go find it in history. Go look at their life. Anyone who's done far things for Jesus, who actually had a relationship with Jesus, is doing and going all over the place and doing all those things, not because they're going places, but because of one place that they've never left, and that's his feet. In other words, at some point, if you look closely at their life, they have a practice of continuing to sit in front of Jesus. They might be going places, other countries, other worlds, across the globe, 1,000 different places to speak, and yet there's one place you'll find in their life that's consistent, and that is, hey, Jesus and me. We're there. I'll never forget, some of you might know the name Charles Stanley because of Atlanta. And maybe because of his son, Andy. Charles has not a perfect person by any means, but he's had a pretty large ministry and had a large ministry in Atlanta. And I remember getting a tour of that ministry. The size of the building was large. And I remember walking into his office, and his office was probably half the size of this room. Judge that for which way you want to go. I'm like, maybe he likes a lot of space. But in his office, someone said, hey, you want to see something? I'm like, sure. So they bring me over, and I'm like, oh, he's got like a private bathroom. He doesn't have a private bathroom. He has a closet. And in that closet, there's like this quilt. And someone said, that quilt, his mom made him. I'm like, so he put it in a closet in his office? They're like, no. Like, he'll come in here and pray every day. And it matters to him that this quilt is in here because that's the same quilt that he grew up praying like with and next to as he was a kid. And so it's one way of anchoring this practice in his life. It's not magical, it's not the quilt of many colors. It's just a quilt, okay? But it means something to him. And so he'll come in here and he'll pray. And I just remember thinking, man, for as great as the things are that he was doing, and as big as his office was and the size of all that, I just remember thinking, man, at the end of the day, it seems to me like this guy has a practice where he's just a kid praying to his heavenly Father every day. And I thought, man, that's something to aspire to. Not a large office, but maybe a small room with Jesus. Over and over and over again, the Bible will put this out there. In fact, what if the largest priority in your life in 2025 will be the posture of your heart? What if that's it? This quote comes from a book called Quiet. I love it. Not the book, the quote. The book's pretty decent too, but the author, he says this, he says, every moment of every day, the most significant reality in the entire universe is the radical availability of God's presence. You thought about that? That at any moment, if you are a follower of Jesus, you have access to the God of the universe. That's like the most radical thing. He's not wrong. At any moment, of any day, we can go to him. You know what I think? I think most of us are Martha. I know we're wired differently. Some of us are introverts, some of us are extroverts. Some of us are people. Some of us are things people. Some of us are type A. Others of us are more chill. But I think at the end of the day, most of us, if we're just be honest, we're like Martha. I wonder, what would it look like for you this year to not fill your life with so many things? I think for some of us, we do that because we're so focused on arriving somewhere, on arrival. We're like, hey, God, this is the year I got to get that thing done. This is the year I'm going to be the parent that I wanted to be. This is the year I'm going to be the dad that I never had, or the husband that my wife deserves, or this is the year that I'm going to make partner, or this is the year that I'm going to graduate. And by the way, I think some of those are okay goals. But it's possible, I think, that we get so focused on arriving somewhere that we discount the fact that God just wants us to stay somewhere with him in a moment, in time and place. For others of us, I don't think it's arrival. I think for some of us, when I talk about this, you're going, look, man, that sounds fantastic, but I'm just trying to survive. And so for us, the many is not because we're trying to arrive somewhere. For us, the many is because we're just trying to survive the day, which is a real thing. It's a real thing. Okay, I'm just trying to make it to the next paycheck or make it to the next lunch or breakfast or whatever else. I got to make it through this next week. And so, yeah, I would love to spend some alone time with Jesus with a little quilt, and that's wonderful, a little room. All my rooms are filled with children's toys. Right? Just trying to survive. Trying to make it. And so I think the temptation there is that we might, in pursuit of surviving, miss the one thing that we need to actually live and survive. Jesus. It's fascinating to me, and I'll leave you with this, that every time that you see Mary in the Bible, do you know where she is? At Jesus' feet. Her brother Lazarus dies. He brings him back, but spoiler alert. But her brother Lazarus dies. She runs up, she's at his feet, falls at his feet. If you weren't here, he wouldn't have died. Oftentimes we get told that all the disciples missed the fact that Jesus was going to die. What's fascinating is Mary, the last week of his life, do you know where Mary's at? At his feet. We're told this, that she's anointing his feet. Jesus said, leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. She has done what she could. She's anointed my body beforehand for burial. In other words, all the other disciples, when Jesus is being killed and crucified, are going, what is going on? And Mary's going, you didn't hear him? Weren't you listening? Like, we were healing the sick. Yeah, but didn't you hear him say he was going to die for us and be buried? Mary got it. And Jesus says, truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she will be done, or what she has been done will be told in memory of her. Here's what Jesus is saying. This woman is going to be famous, not because she went out and did everything for me and saved thousands of people. She will be famous because she was at my feet. Man. What if in 2025, it was a famous year for you? Not because of everywhere you went and all the things you accomplished and all the things that you did, or just because you survived. Man, what would it look like for us, even as a church, to be famous in 2025 because we were at the feet of Jesus? Cool. So I'm going to pray for us, and in a minute, we're going to stand to your feet. But before you stand to your feet, I just want to give you a second to be at his feet, okay? Would you do that with me? Father, I pray for my own heart. I pray for the hearts of our church, those who would call Grace their home. Lord, I pray for the heart that feels alone and that you're distant. Maybe because they're distracted or quite honestly, they just didn't think that you care. They're saying, don't you care? Can you tell someone to help me? Lord, as we follow you into the new year, would we first come to you? Lord, for the hearts of those in this room who are just crippled with anxiety because the alarm bells are going off in their life and they've been trying to manage it alone. Maybe today you're just looking at them and saying, David, David, Martha, Martha, will you just come to me? Bring it to me. Lord, help us to choose the one thing that we need in the midst of the many. Forgive us. Forgive us for making everything else more important than you. Lord, may we right now find some time with you. Speak to us. Even now, begin to heal us. And Lord, would this just be a moment where we look and go, yeah, the trajectory of my year changed. Not because of anywhere I went, but maybe because of what I didn't do or let go of. Lord, we love you and we need you.